Hello, Uriel from Ninja Bear Studio here. Welcome back. In this video, we will talk about reacting to fatal damage, which is a continuation from the hit reaction topic that we saw in the previous video. We'll start by looking into the death animation montage for both default and strong attacks, the death gameplay ability that should always be added to the characters in the game, and some additional features in the combat damage data asset. At the end, we will test everything and make sure that it's working as expected. In the engine, the first thing I want to do to make things a little easier is to modify the player base damage. I will do that by editing the attribute data table used to initialize the player's attributes. This way, just a few attacks should be enough to defeat our enemy. Now let's look into the animation montages, starting with the default one. Similar to hit reactions, once again I have multiple sequences representing different directions. We have front, back, and the sides. The first unique thing about this animation montage is the usage of looping sections, so each main directional section will follow into another one that loops into itself. These are meant to represent the static part of the animation that will keep playing after the main part is done and the character is waiting to be destroyed. In this animation, I am also using the ragdoll notify. As you would expect, this notify will interact with the combat component and enable ragdoll mode in the main combat mesh. And the last new element here is the death notify. It will tell the combat manager that this character is ready to be destroyed. Now, the death notify is not really necessary if your animation is not looping, because in that case, the death gameplay ability will end when the animation finishes playing. And when that happens, the equivalent logic will also be triggered in the Combat Manager component. This finishes this animation montage and we can move on to the next one, which will be used for strong attacks. This animation has everything that we just saw in the previous one: direction animation sequences, looping sections, the ragdoll animation notify, and the death animation notify. Now we can move on to the gameplay ability. This gameplay ability extends the base death ability class, and it should be always granted by default to all your characters. By default, the death ability uses the simple animation provider, but I switched to the directional one so I can use contexts and directional animations. As you can see, for fatal knockback attacks, I am using the animation montage containing sequences with strong hits. And then I have the map between directional ranges and their appropriate montage section names. If you need a refresher on this topic, then you can check the previous video or the documentation site. Now, probably one of the most important aspects of the death gameplay ability is the way its gameplay tags are configured. You want to make sure that whenever the death ability activates, it will appropriately cancel other abilities, such as attacks, blocking, casting, and so on and so forth. One final note here, and I'll bring this up again when we're talking about opportunity attacks, is that I am blocking the death ability activation when the owner died from an opportunity attack. The opportunity system also handles the scenario, and I don't want the death ability and the opportunity ability conflicting with each other. Moving on, like I mentioned before, the death ability should always be granted by default. So let's just do that by adding the ability to the Ninja Gas ability data asset that was created and assigned to the enemy blueprint in the previous video. As you can see, now we have both the hit reaction ability and the death ability assigned to the list of default abilities granted to the character. The last step is to perform some adjustments in the combat damage data asset also assigned to the enemy blueprint. First, I'd like to talk about the death time limit property. This is the time in seconds that the combat manager will wait until it forces the cancellation of all abilities and destroys the character whenever a fatal damage is received. I have also added the dissolve damage handler. This handler will watch for fatal damage, and when that happens, it will update material parameters in all meshes in the character using values obtained from the float curves. This is of course very flexible because it allows you to set a list with multiple parameters that might be available in your materials, and for each one of them, the appropriate float curve that sets values over time. Of course, using the dissolve damage handler is optional, and I just want to show you how it works. Now let's check our results. First, let me inflict fatal damage from the front using my default attack. Now I will do the same but using my heavy attack. You can clearly see the ragdoll just before the dissolve effect. And finally, let's try to inflict fatal damage from behind. Looks good. In the next video, I will cover the combo system. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.